Hello Capsuleer, my name is Gildy and welcome to EVE Online. Welcome back to the Planetary Industry mini-series. If you haven't seen the first video about PI basics, I recommend checking it out, as I will not be repeating basics over here, but move on from the point I ended on before. As promised, I will cover more advanced topics this time, including the rest of the buildings, their functions and limitations, how to set up a chain of production for higher tier materials, and how to set up a whole factory planet for P3 and even a chain for P4 materials. Let's get right into it. In the last video, we set up an extraction planet that is also turning that material right into P1 level. Why did I do that instead of pulling P0 material to the maximum of extractor's ability and reprocess it elsewhere? There are three reasons for that really. First is taxes. Every player-owned customs office, POCO for short, has some tax. Both the game and the corporation that owns the POCO set the taxes on it, and yes, you can sometimes still find some NPC-owned ones stranded in wormhole space. So the less times you have to move your materials in and out, the better for you. Second reason is that raw materials are pulled in massive amounts, so they would clog the launch pads quite quickly. And the third one is an extension of the second one, and the reason is that I am not a masochist. I do not want to go and empty my launch pads every other day, having to move it around just to the factories to then move it to other factories. This is why I extract raw materials on planets and right away turn them into P1 materials. This is why for the production I do on my main character, which results in robotics production, material used in a ton of different industrial lines, I have 4 planets set up for pulling P0 materials, then turn them into P1, and then pull them from the POCOs and drop them on my factory planet. That factory planet, despite having all my setup in low sec, is situated in high sec due to the amount of materials I need to shift in and out of it, making it safer and less of a hassle because I keep it closer to my HQ. I pay higher taxes because of that, but I am aware of that trade-off and prefer to keep that in high sec rather than risking moving a lot of materials out of low sec all at once or in several trips, making restocking that factory planet a chore. Of course, I did say 4 planets for P1, and you are probably thinking that I forgot how to count because you can see 5 chugging along on the screen. This is one of the lessons that you learn after you started doing PI. Each region you set up in will have a shortage of one type of material. One material just isn't cutting it, and there will be less of it compared to others, which makes for a bottleneck for your production. This is why I have in my setup 2 planets producing chiral structures, and it's also the reason why getting interplanetary consolidation to 5 is a good thing to do. You can resolve that bottleneck this way, buy some of that material off of the market through buy orders, or have a surplus sent from an alt. It's up to you, but it probably will happen to you if you set your PI to work in the highest gear. Here is where all the production chain thinking comes in. In order to have a nice ISK printing machine on higher level, you need to know what you need and how much of it you will need. For the first part, I pull 4 different raw materials on my planets and make them into P1 equivalents. Since I create robotics, which is a P3 material, I need to first make my P2s somewhere in an efficient manner and put a mental pin in the efficient part, we'll come back to that, and then turn that into robotics. The things I need for my production is mechanical parts and consumer electronics. Those bad boys need reactive metals, toxic metals, precious metals and chiral structures we set up last time. See now why I told you last time that some people hate PI? So, since I have just P1 being created on my planets, my factory planet will have to make both P2 and P3. Now, for efficiency. As we can see on EVE WebTools website, if you hover over the materials, there is one thing I did not mention in the last video. Let's say we hover over precious metals. There is a little 20 showing there and 3000 next to noble metals, the P0 material. What that means is you need 3000 noble metals per factory to make 20 precious metals. But for mechanical parts, we need 40 precious metals, so do you need to double your factory counts? Not always. This chart is useful, but I always prefer to look at the planets, since this chart fails to show you one crucial thing: the time needed to make each of the materials. Your extractor pulls materials every 15 minutes. Therefore, it can fill a bunch of factories before the first batch gets even processed, because P1 factories take 30 minutes to finish their production. Production of P2 takes 1 hour, so in theory, one P1 factory can still supply as much as a P2 factory needs to operate. Then, P3 production also takes 1 hour, but takes double the materials of one of the P2 producing factory, so you need to have 2 P2 for one P3 factory if you want to keep on producing materials with no stops. And now let's look at my planets again to go through this in practice, because I probably lost some of you with this theoretical talk. My P1 planets have 7 P1 factories each factory producing 40 P1 materials per hour. Thanks to that, I can supply 7 factories producing P2 materials. Then, on my factory planet, I have 2 sets of only 6 factories churning out P2 materials and 3 factories producing P3. Why do I have 7 P1 factories then? Just because I had the CPU and power grid for them, and if I can fill all of them with P0 materials, I am making a little bit more than I will use up, which either makes for a nice stash in case you forget to set your planets one day, or go on vacation for 2 weeks and need to put something into the factory to keep it going, or if I gather enough of the build-up, I just go and sell it for extra ISK. Last element of my factory planet setup are the 4 launch pads you can see. Why so many? Because with how I use quite efficient 24-hour cycles on P1 planets to pull as much as I can from them, I can be quite lazy with my factory. Since robotics needs just 2 P2 materials, it means just 4 P1 inputs. So I just throw one of each of the P1 into a launch pad after I set the routes before and let this work out robotics for me. And this setup allows me to do restock runs of the factory planet once, maybe a week. Flipping through the launch pads is as easy as choosing one from a drop-down menu when you are in system with it. Unfortunately, from what I know, you cannot rename them, which would be such a great quality of life feature, because it would allow you to just name them with the materials you are dropping instead of having random names that you need to memorize. But let's get back to how this factory planet works. P1 gets routed into one of the bigger triangles, turned into P2, and then gets thrown back into one of the launch pads for transit, then right into P3 factories that are being fed at the same pace they are producing, so as long as I have materials in launch pads, this keeps on going. And voila, you are now producing easier of the P3 materials on one character. Another setup I want to share with you is a mixed material setup, for when you would like to maybe complement your robotics with the rest of the materials that go into fuel blocks, like, well, I do. It's nothing really fancy or super efficient, but it just about works enough that I can keep churning out decent amounts of fuel blocks whenever I want. The bottom 3 planets are just your regular P1 material planets. Only thing I really changed here compared to the basic planet I showed in the previous video was to add in my bottleneck material planets a second extractor control unit to squeeze out as many extractors as possible. Also, as you can see, the tight setup of all the buildings pays off. I was able to get the second extractor quite far away to get a completely different hotspot for raw materials to increase my production. Then we can visit the top 3 factories, and what do we see? Extractors, of course, some P1 factories, but also 2 P2 factories on each of those planets. What I do here is to collect my precious metals, which are used in both enriched uranium and mechanical parts production, and shove them into the 2 planets equally, which produce reactive and toxic metals locally. Then I do the same with electrolytes and move them to my water planet. This makes for a way slower production than having an actual factory planet, but Since you can only have 6 planets up here at the same time, this works out for a slow and steady production. Lastly, let's ask ourselves a question. What if you want to just buy all the materials, or maybe you own a corporation that has buyback setup and people send you PI in there, which you want to make into something worth a bit more? Enter factory planet setup. As an example, let's take the integrity response drones, P4 material. In order to make those, you need 3 P3 materials, gel matrix biopaste, hazmat detection systems, and planetary vehicles. The beauty of this approach to PI is that you need to play the market to get the lowest PI material prices, and once you get that to maximize your profits, you don't really need maxed out skills to set up your production. You can see on the screen right here a setup for production of P3 materials in 2 factories, enough to supply 1 P4 factory. In this case, this planet produces gel matrix biopaste as our P3. It requires 3 different P2s, so we have 3 launch pads and 3 storage facilities that store all the P1 needed for it. The 3 clusters of P2 factories reprocess all that and then throw it into the P3 factories to create our gel matrix biopaste. This planet is created with just level 4 of command center upgrades, which require dropping some storage buildings instead of launch pads. How do you get your materials into this to not get it too tangled? You can, once every few hours, perform what is called expedited transfer. Simply drop the first material that needs to go into one of your storage facilities, go to Products, click on the thing you just dropped in, and select Expedited Transfer. Choose your destination, then drag over the materials to perform the transfer and confirm. This way, you just threw all of the materials into the storage unit at once, where they will be spread out to the factories thanks to the route you are setting up for them. And to prevent you having to wait, we got exactly 3 launch pads for 3 storage facilities, so you don't need to wait once for any of the cooldowns to go down, and you can fill all those buildings with P1 and start producing right away without any downtime. Then, once your 3 P3 planets are running, you can set the silliest P4 planet ever. 3 launch pads and the last building at your disposal, the high-tech production plant, which produces P4 materials. The limitation of this building is that you can only place it on barren or temperate planets. And that is it. I am sure that there are more ways to create setups, and if you got any interesting ones, share your ideas in the comments of this video. Those are the 3 types I have personally interacted with and had some success. If you reached this point of the video, hey, glad to see you here. Not a lot of people reach that far in such long guides. Just wanted to say hi to those that do. If you enjoyed this video, leave a like and subscribe to see my future uploads. If you are interested in what I will talk about next, my videos go up every Sunday. And if we never see each other again in Space Capsulia, fly safe!